Сначала я хотел поздравить вас.
First, I want to congratulate you, not on the end of the world, but on the end of darkness. Today at 3:15 p.m., daylight begins to get longer. I am often asked about the end of the world, about 12/12/21/12. I say that nothing will happen, it will be as usual. On December 21st, we will celebrate Stalin's birthday. There are two versions of his birth, the 6th of December and the 21st of December. If Stalin himself assigned the date of his birthday, December the 21st, then of course this solstice, as it is called, means a lot. Therefore, I congratulate you on the great man's birthday, and thank you for this meeting. A figure like Stalin is completely extraordinary. If 20 years ago there were almost no materials, now there is a huge amount of materials. You know that in 1956, after the 20th Congress, in Khrushchev's speech, it was forbidden to even pronounce Stalin's name. All books were removed. And exactly 30 years later, the topic of Stalin was raised again, hoping that the generation that knew Stalin had already passed away, and the youth had no idea about him at all. And if we compare the publications over these years, starting from 1985-86, then we will see that there is an increasing interest in this theme. But the interesting thing is that the official mass media still have a negative attitude towards the increase in publications on this theme. We have entered a period where society has the opportunity to express itself, in particular on the internet. Until this time, it was the mass media that spoke on behalf of society. An ordinary person, I experienced it myself, could not express himself. It was possible to write an article for a newspaper, but publishing the article was out of the question. I wrote articles, they told me, "Thank you, very interesting," and everything ended on this. What is so unusual about such a figure as Stalin? I will talk about what is not yet on the mass media or on the internet. Speaking here on the theme of the comparison of the constitutions of 1936, Stalin's constitution, and the constitutions of 1977 and 1993, M.V. Velichka, answering the questions, very precisely defined that both Stalin and Putin are crisis managers if we speak in modern terms. Those who are interested in this lecture may find it on our channel. The link is under the video. If we talk about Stalin, then in addition to the fact that he was a crisis manager, his activities covered such a period in history that had never been before and never was after. Anyone familiar with the materials of the conception of social safety understands what this means. This means that Stalin was responsible for governance over the entire civilization during an almost 25-year period when the frequencies of biological social time coincided. After that, a process of the changing of the logics of social behavior took place. What does it mean, coincided? Those who have studied our works will understand that the entire world society passed through a period of resonance in technical terms, a short-term resonance, but resonance nonetheless. And Stalin was given to the Russian civilization as if from above, although he was an ordinary person. And if at the time there hadn't been such a tough hand, such a tough person as Stalin, it is unknown whether the Russian civilization would have survived. This is a big question. And it's unlikely that another could have done it, and candidates were many. Now there are many books, among which there are many that ignore that which is most important in history. History has no subjunctive mood. What do I want to say? There is such a book by Andrei Kolganov named The Millstone of History. In the book, he writes about how, in some miraculous way, he was transported back to 1923. Apparently he delved into archival materials. He describes in great detail the situation before Lenin's death. He writes that shortly after Lenin's death, a group of Trotskyists fought for power, and Stalin represented the real clan of Bolsheviks. He described how this collective was formed. Stalin on his own would not have been able to do anything, who then carried out collectivization, industrialization of the country, and actually organized the victory in the Great Patriotic War. When you read such materials, it seems that a lot is already clear, but you see that there is something that the author just does not catch. As before, what presses everyone is what the mass media have developed by this time. Stalin is a dictator, an executioner. Of course, the author draws Stalin in accordance with the stereotypes that have developed by now. But at the same time, the author shows that Stalin was a very talented leader. There is another book named Alternative History by A.P. Sidorov. He writes how something like a demon or a devil comes to him and offers him to enter a nodal point in history and try to change the course of history himself, since in history there are a lot of disputes. The author chose March 1935. He can be invisible there, no one can kill him, including the KGB. He can penetrate anywhere, he can move anywhere, he is a kind of phantom. The author describes how he appears in Stalin's office, passing through the reception room with the secretary, and observes how Stalin reacts to the way a man enters his office. So who is he? This author and the other aforementioned one use what? Since they are from our time, they preserve the memories of all the events that took place, for example, after 1923 and after 1935, and thereby gain Stalin's trust. Everything that the author says to Stalin, for example, that there will be an uprising in Germany, and it will be suppressed at such and such a time, that there will be a communist uprising in Estonia, it will also be suppressed. He also says to him that there are certain deposits of diamonds and oil. At first Stalin is distrustful towards him, but then on the recommendations of this phantom, he invites Beria, organizes expeditions to various regions, and finds these deposits. There were not enough diamonds in our industry at the time. They also discover oil in Tatarstan, in Bashkiria. All this inspires trust in Stalin, and then this phantom suggests organizing something like the Red Corporation, only of the Soviet type, i.e., gathering specialists and analysts, collecting all information. At that time, a lot of information came from intelligence services. If you read these books, I want to draw your attention to the following things. In 1985-86, I still served in the Grenadier Barracks and communicated very closely with academician F.G. Uglov. At the Duchess in Komarova, the so-called Bohemians gathered to drink tea and talk. There were composers, architects, many different people. There was the teetotaler Shishko with his wife, and there was Ivan Alexandrovich Drozdov from Moscow, a journalist and writer. I talked a lot with him about the fundamental issues. He spoke about the dominance of Jews in all mass media. The Jewish question really concerned him. But there were also many Jews among those people that day. They were all anti-Semites. And now suddenly I find on the internet the book named The Last Ivan, where Drozdov describes the situation with the mass media during Stalin's time and after Stalin's death. When you read this book, it gets very dark in your heart. That is, he writes that everything is absolutely in the hands of the Jews. There is no way out. There are only Jews everywhere, only Jews all around. Maybe it was me who could not that day explain to him the role of the Jews, and I myself actually did not know much then. The books named Dehermitization and Deadwater had not yet been written, but, observing the visitors that day, his wife died. Shishko had a rather beautiful wife, whom Drozdov married after Shishko's death. In my opinion, she was Jewish, and Uglov's wife was Jewish as well. What I mean to say is that the situation was not simple, but to speak about it with Drozdov was useless, although he knew about the Institute of Jewish Wives. Why did I mention these books? Because they also touch upon the Jewish question, which you can look at from different angles. If you read these books, of course every writer subjectively describes this or that period, then you can come to some brinks of understanding this Jewish question in the 30s, in the 70s, and now. Because these guys with a subjunctive mood fall into the past. They also know about the Jewish question. Those who attended my speech on November the 1st know that then I raised a very important theme. I said that Stalin failed to solve the most important problem. I don't know whether he did not understand it or understood it, but decided to deal with it in a peculiar way. This is the problem concerning the mass media. During the monarchy, and during the times after the revolution, the civil war, during the time of Stalin, after the assassination of Stalin, and up to the present time, all mass media have never been pro-Russian, for the Russian people. You may especially understand this if you listen to the screeching and hysteria over the American adoption law that concerns the adoption of Russian children by Americans. This says a lot about much, especially if you listen to the radio station Echo of Moscow. I get the impression that the entire Jewish creme de la creme that sits there is very concerned about the future of children from Russia. And only one caller said, they didn't cut him off right away, "You don't understand. Americans are very practical people. If they do something, then profit is definitely calculated. They have no humanitarian motives." He began to explain that the federal budget in America gives a lot of money for adoption. Once at a speech by Putin, he was asked this question 8 times. He methodically, calmly answered that we have no complaints about those who adopt. We have complaints against the authorities in America who ignore our demands to see how children from Russia live. Why the American authorities ignore our demands, Putin did not say. But this one who called the radio studio said that this was because a large number of children are taken apart for organs. It is like good material. I understand that in order to accuse one must have evidence. You see, though, how everything is going on now. All this we can discuss in our own environment. In America, one can't do anything without proof. And yet Putin said that he would sign a law banning Americans from adopting our children. And all the mass media are screaming about it. Lavrov backed down a little and said that if we sign this law, then certainly we will not be able to trace the fate of our children in America. But even before that, we were not allowed to figure it out. Why? Because in this case, it will turn out that out of 60,000 children taken to America, I do not know the statistics, a lot went into consumables for organs. You probably remember the case when an American woman put her adopted child on a plane and sent him back. My wife said, I do not exclude the fact that the woman realized that the child would be taken from her for a large amount of money, and she therefore decided to let him live rather than die in America. Of course, I'm presenting this as a version, but it's very strange why the US government does not allow our observers to trace the lives of these children. Returning to the subject of Stalin, is it possible to imagine, during the time of Stalin, that our children would be taken away by a potential enemy? Germans, Americans, the British? It's impossible to imagine. Those who send these children possess huge funds. This is a lot of money. This is very big business. And all those who shout out that Americans should have the right to adopt our children, of course, are paid to do so. I will not believe for a second that they would just go out to the Duma and chant there for free. Who will go there and stomp around with some slogans just for free? Our society is now very split thanks to this law. I have no doubts about it. We will witness who is who. Of course, everything that is written and spoken about in the mass media concerning this is very far from what is in reality. Why? And what didn't work out? I had an 1.5-hour conversation with Alexei Minyailov. He also writes about Stalin and presents him as a highly initiated man. Everyone has the right to their own version of the situation. He told me that he spoke with Konstantin Petrov, and they did not find a common language. I will not give evaluations, or even so my evaluations cause hysterics. But I told him my evaluations. You probably know Konstantin Dushenov. Maybe some of you read his article as the article of the last Stalinist. Dushenov sincerely believes that Ivan the Terrible was a martyr, Nicholas II was a martyr, and at the end of the article Dushenov speaks of Stalin too as a Tsar, the Red Emperor, and he writes that a Tsar will come anyway, and then things will be fine. The discussions of this article are very interesting. There is so much rejection of the monarchy in discussions, some of which go like this. Socialism is paradise on earth, orthodoxy is paradise after death. Socialism and orthodoxy are two sides of the same coin. It is impossible to go to heaven after death if you do not build heaven on earth. It's so simple, as he stole, cheated, exploited other people, then paradise after death is impossible. And there is also Stalin's evaluation of a monarchy there, which says that from the point of view of Stalin, the Tsar is one of the main exploiters, but nobody says that the Tsar is good and that the nobles are bad. This is what J.V. Stalin writes in his report, National Factors in Party and State Affairs, for the 12th Congress of the RCPB, April the 19th, 1923. There are two ways of governing a country. One way is to have a simplified apparatus, headed, say, by a group of people, or by one man, having hands and eyes in the localities in the shape of governors. What happened next correlate with the ardor passion with which the discussion is going on. Should governors be elected or appointed? This is a very simple form of government under which the ruler, in governing the country, receives the kind of information that can be received from the governors and comforts himself with the hope that he is governing honestly and well. Presently, friction arises. Friction grows into conflicts, and conflicts into revolts. Later, the revolts are crushed. Such a system of government is not our system, and in addition, although a simple one, it is too costly. But there is another system of government, the Soviet system. In our Soviet country, we are operating this other system of government, the system which enables us to foresee with accuracy all changes, all the circumstances among the peasants, among the nationals, among the so-called aliens, and among the Russians. This system of supreme organs possesses a number of barometers which forecast every change, which register and warn against a Basmach movement, Ten abandoned movement, Kronstadt, and all possible storms and disasters. That is the Soviet system of government. It is called Soviet power, people's power, because relying on the common people, it is the first to register any change. It takes the appropriate measures and rectifies the line in time if it has become distorted, criticizes itself, and rectifies the line. This system of government is the Soviet system, and it requires that the system of our higher agencies should include agencies expressing absolutely all national needs and requirements. And now let's look about what Dushenov writes about Stalin's attitude towards the monarchy. Dushenov writes, "The first Russian monarch, the holy Tsar Martyr Ivan IV the Terrible, arranged Russia in accordance with its great vocation of the third Rome of the last times." On the eve of the onset of these terrible times, another Tsar Martyr, Nicholas Alexandrovich II, with his free will sacrifice, strengthened the Russian spiritual foundations, which, thanks to this, survived a terrible, bloody era of fiery tribulations and endless sorrows. The cruel Red Emperor Joseph Stalin did not allow the orphaned Russian power to perish in the whirlpools of fratricidal wars and treacherous intrigues, by iron and blood soldering the disintegrating Russia into an unprecedented social empire. It seems to me that now the time is far away, the time when the last coming Russian Tsar will take away the wounded, tortured Russia from the hands of the temporary statesman, in order to present it to Christ the Lord with glorious, radiant, joyful, abundantly washed with Russian blood, rich, holy faith, and unshakable faithfulness to his God. That is, if you read our analytical note, named On Possible Scenarios for the Development of Events after December 1995, then it speaks about the possibility of the monarchical variant. There are people who really rely on this monarchical variant. A monarchy cannot exist without counts, princes, and nobles. Many are already buying these titles. Well, in order to nonetheless understand why Stalin left such a mark, why there is such an interest in him, as well as in Ivan the Terrible, Peter the Great, we approach from the following angle. There is such a law of correspondence of the object of governance and the system of governance. In order to be clearer as to what it is about, I will give you an example. Many sitting here today drive a car. So if you drive a car, and then you have to drive a tractor, maybe even with a long trailer or a trailer vehicle, you will have big problems because you have no skills. Or let's take another example. There is our IL-96 liner, let's liken it to Russian civilization, and the American Boeing 777, let's liken it to Western civilization. Each airliner has an autopilot, i.e. after the takeoff the captain turns on the autopilot, and it flies along a given course, usually almost until landing. Into the autopilot, certain algorithms are set, which are related to the aerodynamics of the plane, its system of governance, up to the point that the psychology of the crew is also taken into account. And let us now imagine that into our autopilot of Russian civilization, the algorithmics of the Western autopilot have been set. What will happen? It will twitch and then perish in the end. The same will happen if you do the opposite. What happened in 1991, with the coming into power of the liberals, they tried and are still trying to set the algorithmics for the development of Western civilization into the autopilot of Russian civilization. From the moment of christening, Russia has been in autopilot mode for 1,000 years. And this or that leader remains in history only because he begins to use the autopilot not during landing or takeoff, but in flight, in the process. And it turns out like this. Attitudes towards Stalin are very different. There are people, mostly ordinary ones, who believe, hope and say, if Stalin was in power, he'd show you. And the whole liberal creme de la creme hates Stalin, and they do not even think that someone will come to put things in order in the country. And if such leaders remain in the people's memory, and there is a discord in their opinions, this is a consequence of the fact that this leader not only intervened in the activities of the autopilot, he can intervene either in accordance with God's providence or against providence. In each case, opinions will be very different. If he acts in accordance with providence, then he is not just a great and cruel tyrant, but he is also the father of nations. This is the leader, this is the savior of the fatherland. But at the same time, we must understand that there is this mafia, the global predictor, which declared, through the directive of the US National Security Council 20/1 of August 18, 1948, the following. We had too bitter an experience during the past 15 years. So you all, do not think that the past started on August the 18th, 1948 for no reason. Americans are very attentive to chronologies and dates. If you look at the law of correspondence of the object of governance with the system of governance from these positions, then you will see a great deal of that which is usually impossible to see. Those who go on the internet and see how some comrades are throwing about comments, look, Stalin smoked a pipe and drank. He does not correspond to the human type of psyche structure. And Pushkin drank and played cards and chased after women. I don't think that they were such idiots that they did not understand these things. Judging from our time about the people of the past, who did a lot for the blago of the people, the motherland, is the highest degree of idiocy. I know of many teetotalers, for example, Hitler. So what? If we talk about the type of psyche structure, yes, they existed at the time, but there were no precise definitions of these structures of the psyche. And when a certain phenomenon is not vested with a clear lexical definition, this phenomenon seems to be kind of absent for people. I still want to return to a very difficult question. When we began to investigate it, we realized that we could not give a certain answer to this question. For this we had to read many books. However, this question still remains today. After listening to Putin's speech to the Federal Assembly, I correlated him with Stalin. Long ago, I said that Putin is the egregorial heir of Comrade Stalin. And it doesn't depend on whether Putin understands this or not, whether he wants this or not, but we see him slowly and surely drifting in this direction, and some are hysterical that Putin wants to restore the Soviet Union. I have already said that all mass media, and this is not some kind of machine, these are people, journalists on TV and radio, journalists in newspapers and magazines, since the beginning of the 19th century, since the time of Pushkin, all the mass media were anti-Russian. That is, they were liberal. In those days, liberalism was not different from what it is today, but that liberalism helped to bring about the revolution. What about those cadres that we had in the country before the revolution? They came to post-revolutionary Russia. And this period, when Stalin and the group that supported him expelled Trotsky, was the most terrible period for Russian culture. Stalin was very seriously engaged in culture. He apparently understood that culture is a kind of potter who forms stereotypes. However, many people don't comprehend all that I'm talking about now, but I believe that young people will figure it out. Our youth can get to the bottom of the essence. As Kozma Prutkov said, many things we do not understand, not because our understandings are weak, but because these are things not integrated into the conceptual circle of our understandings. What I mean to say is that when I try to get the point around someone's head, people don't understand it, because these things are not integrated into the conceptual circle of their understandings. Culture is also an institution of education. It is an educational standard. Putin has put forward a lot of things that he would like to achieve. But if we proceed from the current state of affairs, then on behalf of our collective, I declare in full seriousness, many things cannot be achieved until educational standards are changed. Through what do we first of all see the problems of current educational standards? Through journalism. All universities have departments of journalism. I have repeatedly spoken about it abroad and in our country, even from the rostrum of the European Parliament, and said that the crisis of the 5 sciences is not only in Russian universities, but also in theirs. I said this at the Catholic University of Leuven, Belgium, at the Islamic University of Kuala Lumpur in Malaysia. What are these 5 sciences? These are philosophy, psychology, sociology, history, and economics. And all these 5 sciences cannot be considered sciences because they are metrologically inconsistent. This is more or less clear with economics, but what about humanities, for example, history? History must also have metrology, be metrologically consistent. Those who remember the first editions of Dead Water should remember that the cover of the book said, "What about metrology in history?" This was also in the Tsarist times, before the change in the logics of social behavior. But it was not so relevant at that time, and it did not put pressure on the society. Now, if we do not change educational standards, in which there is complete discord between religion and science, then nothing good will happen. My last conversation with academician Zubov before his death was about this: how to create a conceptual apparatus that would return our society to the times before the birth of Christ. At that time, science and religion were one, and there was a one and holistic apparatus of concepts, and now many already see that. If a conceptual apparatus is not created, the apparatus that would combine problems in religion and science, then the crisis will only get worse. As for our journalists, they are the most poorly educated who do not know life, and they are the most highly paid in any region, any city, any remote place of our country. Not all of them, of course. In our environment, journalists who understand this have already appeared, but this is a minority. Stalin carefully studied not only the articles that were sent to the Izvestia and Pravda newspapers. I.A. Drozdov, in his book, writes that even during Stalin's life, despite the fact that almost all newspaper offices were staffed with Jews, only certain books that were allowed by critics were published. In spite of that fact, a book called White Birch appeared, written by Mikhail Bubyanov, a writer from a remote corner of our country. The author came to Moscow to publish his book. This book was published. At that time there were problems with housing as it was after the wartime. So M. Bubyanov rented a room in which there was a telephone. After a while he received a call. His wife answered this call and said that Mikhail was asleep, as he had been working all night. "When will he wake up? Can I call him in an hour?" asked a voice on the other end. An hour later Mikhail woke up, answered the call, and he was told, "Comrade Bubyanov, this is Comrade Stalin calling you." M. Bubyanov decided that this was someone's joke. Then he was asked, "How do you live? Do you have any problems with housing?" "Fine, I rent a room," Michael answered. "A writer like you should live in normal conditions. You call the Moscow Council today and we will find you accommodation." Mikhail came to the editorial office. Looking around, he expected that someone would laugh at him. However, nobody even paid attention to him. He went to the deputy editor-in-chief and told him the story. They called the Moscow City Council, and there they answered, "This is correct. Come and get a warrant for housing." Drozdov in his book says that they gave Mikhail a good 4-room apartment and a dacha. This Mikhail Bubyanov one day flew on a plane with another writer, Valentin Katayev, who had just written a new book. "Misha, have you read the book?" Katayev asks Bubyanov. "Yes, I read it." "So, how is it?" Nothing special." "Are you an anti-Semite?" Katayev asks Bubyanov. Once Bubyanov wrote a huge article on Katayev's book and sent it to the newspaper. Again Stalin called him. "Comrade Bubyanov, is it you who wrote the article for the Izvestia newspaper?" Bubyanov answered, "Yes, it was me, but it's big. Newspapers don't publish such big articles." "We will try to get it published," Stalin answered. And this article destroyed Katayev as a writer. Many break their brains as to why many Jews after the revolution worked very hard for the country. There were good writers, composers, directors, and then suddenly they became enemies of the country that defended them. Stalin agreed and supported the idea of creating the State of Israel. So we came to an understanding that the institution of education and the educational standard are a part of culture. The culture is biblical, the conception is biblical, educational standards are also biblical. Of course, there were some who escaped from under the educational standards, but before the change in the logics of social behavior, this was impactful, but not in the way it is now, when the third generation after Stalin enters life. If the educational standards are not changed, then the algorithmics that liberals are trying to insert into our autopilot will destroy Russian civilization. You can make any plans you want, but everyone graduating from school, university, is guided by the stereotypes that have been laid in them there. Therefore it turns out, many things we do not understand, not because our understandings are weak, but because these things are not integrated into the conceptual circle of our understandings. This is concluded in the problem of spreading the conception of social safety. The conception of social safety is outside of the system. It offers different educational standards. Soon we will have a series of articles on this theme. We will develop this theme. But besides educational standards, there is something else. I think that Stalin understood this problem. After all, he changed editors of the Izvestia newspaper many times, dispersed the proletarian cultural educational organizations, he himself read many novels, and contributed to their way into life or did not. Stalin supported Mikhail Bulgakov. Film director Bortka directed the film The Master and Margarita, but he did not open this work. This entire novel was written for the sake of one phrase. I have spoken about this more than once. Remember, Yeshua stands in front of Pontius Pilate, and Pontius Pilate asks, "What has been written down about you is little enough, but it is sufficient to hang you." "No, no, Hegemon," said the prisoner, straining with the desire to convince. "This man follows me everywhere, with nothing but his goatskin parchment, and writes incessantly. But I once caught a glimpse of that parchment, and I was horrified. I had not said a word of what was written there. I begged him, please, burn this parchment of yours. But he tore it out of my hands and ran away." "Who was he?" inquired Pilate in a strained voice, and put his hand to his temple. "Matthew the Levite," said the prisoner eagerly. M.A. Bulgakov had a look even a little ahead. And now those who made this book compulsory in our education system, they did not even understand what they had done. Because the information that M.A. Bulgakov implanted in his book basically goes by indirect paths, bypassing consciousness, through the unconscious levels of the psyche, and it goes along the same path as that of all the information that Pushkin gives in his works. Now I'd like to say a little about Putin's message to the Federal Assembly. In our understanding, his speech was not a report on the situation in the country, not on the causes of this message, nor a program document that determines the political course of the state in the near or more distant future. The purpose of his speech is precisely to cloud the future political course and processes taking place in the Russian political kitchen. We believe that Putin has coped with this task. Everything goes according to the principle. As is the mentality of society, so is the message. And everyone finds in his message what he wants to find. Therefore we attribute this message to the genre, the spell of the elements. Since the representatives of the segments of the crowd, different in ideological convictions, living according to tradition and reasoning according to authority, will find something suitable for themselves. Adherents of market liberalism, the promise of a new stage of sale. Adherents of the so-called social state, mention of plans of social economic development. The global predictor, the assurance that the main feature of the new era is that no one can solve global problems alone now. Nationalists and statesmen, promises of a new policy on labor migration, and almost everyone wants the eradication of corruption promised by Putin. Why can't Putin announce what everyone is asking? Where are we moving as a state? Because if he announces where we are moving, then he will say how. But this he cannot do. Pay attention to how he was skillfully led into a direct collision when he was asked this question: what patience you need to have in this situation? And he was patient because he saw that these were the most real provocations. Nonetheless, they say that we have no opposition. The opposition is now replaced by journalists. So they are our opposition as well, because they were on the offensive against Putin. What the opposition could not say, the journalists said. What did they say? Putin is absolutely right when he says that the point is not to change the government, but the point is what will happen afterwards. But none of the opposition can say this. Firstly, because the opposition itself does not know, as it is not educated. And secondly, because the opposition is always the instrument of someone, it is not independent. And of course, Putin is not only for the crowd here, but also for the global crowd. He gives some ideas, views which now I think are being carefully studied in the Masonic lodges. I would like to note one more thing related to the message. Did any of you draw attention to the fact that on the day the message was announced, December the 12th, 2012, there was that film on Rurik, Lost True Story, by Mikhail Zadornov? Many people often ask us questions about signs. We noticed a long time ago that there is a reason why they give so much time to one person. Zadornov speaks on Channel 6. Channel 6 is the channel of the Russian pseudo-Zhrezes. So now we can say with all certainty that Zadornov is a representative of the Russian pseudo-Zhrez clans. And the film about Rurik is in some way a program of those clans. Watch it carefully, I will not comment. But the fact that they synchronized Putin's speech to the Federal Assembly with the film is like their own speech as well. I traced the reaction on the internet. Many did not take Putin's speech seriously. Well, to take it seriously, one needs to know a lot, and not just stare at the screen. Ahead, and Putin also said this, there are very big changes, not only in our country, but also in others, global changes. But Putin did not reveal this. In our works, we state that global changes are underway. We always work with some anticipation. 2013 will be the 20th anniversary of the Constitution, and we will conduct our analysis on the constitutions of 1936, 1977 and 1993. But the chairman of our Duma, Sergei Narishkin, gave us a gift. He made a speech in the channel Culture and demonstrated his absolute non-understanding of the role of jurisprudence in our time. Therefore we often say, if there is the next revolution, it will be against the lawyers. They have taken over everything, and they now devour everything and everyone based on the laws. If we talk about the results for the future, then one needs to understand how to sum up results in general. What characterizes the life of society, i.e. what characterizes the life of socio-economic formation in the process of interaction with nature? The answer, multivariate statistics and their interrelationships. Question 2. What characterizes the changes in the life of society? Answer, changes in statistics and their interrelationships. This is the setting of objectives in relation to the desired changes in statistics in the foreseeable future and the realization of planned changes in life as a result of the implementation of the developed purpose-oriented actions and their current correction in accordance with the concretics of the circumstances. No, they cannot, since the same single facts in the life of society inevitably accompany many other single facts, and it is all of them in aggregate that form statistics that really characterize one or another aspect of society. In other words, different statistics can correspond to the same single data in life, and therefore single facts that do not form a representative sample cannot replace any statistics or a set of multivariate statistics. Pay attention to what Putin was referring to when answering the questions. He referred to various statistics. Everything that I have just said concerns the strategies of socio-economic development that are supposed to be implemented. So, Putin's message is not just a report on the work done in the past by the state apparatus. As for doubling the GDP, it is enough to raise energy prices by 2 times and you will get a doubling of GDP. So what did we see after the message? Nobody opposed Putin. Nobody expressed their ideas. Then they showed interviews with our officials on the sidelines who uttered nothing but nonsense made up of clichés. Therefore we say that the message is in line with the principles of mutual compliance of the system of governance and the object of governance. And those who will insist that the fish rots from the head down, they should know that only a dead fish rots from the head. A living one does not rot. And if this proverb is already applied to the current situation, then the matter has gone very far. There is another saying, "As is the Pope, so is the parish." The biblical mission of the conception of our popes, priests, is to herd the sheep, and not at all to help a person become a human. Therefore, at the end of my speech today, I want to say what I always say at the end. If we want to live like humans, we need to become humans with a capital H. Now there are many poems about Stalin. I will read one of them. It was written for the 50th anniversary of Stalin's death. Some wish to float to power on a breeze, some by whisper, others by marauding. But he is ever power over these, since this is power, with the will of God according. Ponder these words. The liberals still have fear of Stalin. They are like rabbits before a boa constrictor. Revered he not as a god the calf of gold, nor by Mammon's hands did he stain his lips to touch. Wherefore in him a father see the folk, not some placeholder on the changing throne of Rus. Of sacred land he yielded not a span, not to a friend nor enemy nor neighbor. And so for Stalin did the warrior take his stand, who won the homeland victory by his will and by his labor. Far away the victory thunder waned, soldiers left for the occluded yonder. With greedy eyes the coffin men surveyed, and everything they could they tore asunder. Long have they wished him gone from memory. Name just one lie with which his name has not been slandered. How Stalin died, they show it on the screen. With one untruth, he never died, did Stalin. You know, Stalin did not walk away into the past, he dissolved into the future. And those who are waiting for a new Stalin, they don't understand one thing. They think that Stalin will come and restore order, as in the 30s, 40s, 50s. No. Studying the life of Stalin, we came to the conclusion that he was adequate to his era. Naturally, the question arises, how would he act in the conditions in which Putin is now? Personally, I came to the conclusion that he would act most likely the way Putin acted and acts now. One can talk a lot about Stalin. One can also speak about the beginning of the war, saying that Stalin is to blame for the confrontation between Bolshevism and Trotskyism. It is a long conversation. I only try to draw attention to those points that are not yet reflected on the internet, in our analytics. We continue to work. But I strongly advise you to read, those who want to understand. The time has come, I begin the story of Stalin, especially those passages where it is said that Stalin sincerely believed God. It doesn't matter whether he is a figure supported by the people or not, but the words said by Stalin were spoken by him for a reason. I am a Russian of Georgian nationality. We judge people by their deeds, doings. Think about who you would have liked to see in Stalin's place at that time and what the results would have been. Stalin understood that he was dealing with a multinational Russian civilization. We studied a huge amount of materials about his actions and doings and how he made decisions. You know, certain people climbed to the top of the pyramid. The Bolsheviks took power in the country. Among those who supported the Bolsheviks, there were many Russians. They always behaved inadequately. It cannot be said that Stalin did not support the Russians. He could not divide himself into 200 million parts and present himself to every Russian. How is that possible? Putin has almost the same situation. We now have about 15 million in the Corps of Governors. And what? Putin should be divided into 15 million parts in order to hammer into everyone's head what exactly should be done? It is not enough to see. One also needs to ponder. What was the entourage of Stalin about? Molotov himself admitted that they began to luxuriate. For this reason, Stalin was forced to issue a special decree that the apartments of the elite should contain no more than a certain number of rooms. As for Stalin, he didn't live like this elite. When one of the security guards looked into his closet, He was amazed that Stalin had only a few clothes. However, the others from his entourage had a lot of benefits, living in excess, for example, Zhukov. Social safety is understood differently at every specific historical time. God grant that everyone now rises to that understanding of social safety that Stalin had. The way they pour mud on Stalin, no one has had mud poured on them like this. Not Hitler, not Napoleon, not Churchill. But his authority among people is growing, and this has been going on for 60 years. This means that Stalin was mostly predetermined from above, and he carried out his mission to the end, as best he could. There were of course mistakes. The one who does not make mistakes is the one who does nothing. Stalin himself admitted that wishing to suspend the war, he contributed to the communist coup in Yugoslavia. He wanted to suspend the offensive of Hitler's troops. Then he regretted it. There are notes of his where he mentions this, but everyone who ascribes to him that he overslept the war are people who do not understand anything about military affairs. The military is trained in peacetime so that there is no surprise attack. Let politicians be engaged in politics. The military should not be involved in politics in this sense. If it hadn't been for Kuznetsov, then not a single naval ship would have sunk. One fact is enough to ruin the whole conception. Stalin wanted to suspend the start of the war for as long as possible, but it cannot be said that he was not already by the start of the war. Stalin understood that if a Germany, USA, England, Japan coalition was formed, that they would crush us. Stalin looked far ahead. He was able to separate the Japanese and the Americans so that we would not fight on two fronts. In order to understand how difficult it was for him, you have to live that era. I will read a fragment of the work, The Time Has Come, I Begin the Story of Stalin. It is possible that inflaming the emotions of senseless anti-Stalinism, I.L. Bunich, without realizing it, let slip the most important personality secret of the 20th century. In the USSR, the positions of the dictator or imam were not supposed to be. This phrase would have been more accurate if it was followed by the words, from the point of view of the leaders of the Marxist project. I.L. Bunich saw in Stalin not only a dictator, as many idle intellectuals see him, but also an imam, a spiritual leader in the Quranic culture, rejecting the biblical project in general and its Marxist modification in particular. If this is the historical truth, the secret information of one of the Muslim Sufi orders, then the words of the song, "The people's war proceeds, the holy war," finds a new meaning. The secret imam, Stalin, was at the forefront of the leadership of the jihad. Whether Orthodox Muslims like this statement or not, objectively, judging by the direction of Stalin's politics, he was an out-of-ritual imam. L.D. Bronstein, Trotsky, in whose worldview there was no place for God, as a result of which, from his point of view, there can be no people on earth guided by God, expressed himself even more definitely, seeing in Stalin a personification of God. At that, a personification not of the God presented by the Nicaean churches of the Bible, but the God of the Quran. In the religion of Stalinism, Stalin occupies the place of God with all its attributes. But this is no Christian God, who is dissolved into the Trinity. Stalin has left his Trinity, the stage of the Troika, far behind. This is rather a case of Allah. There is no God but God, who dares to do everything himself and who fills the universe with his endlessness. He is the focal point in which everything is united. He is the Lord of the terrestrial and the spiritual worlds, the creator and ruler. He is omnipotent, omniscient, all virtuous and all forgiving. His decisions are irrevocable, and he has 99 names. Leon Trotsky, Stalin, an appraisal of the man and his influence. And in the cited quotation, it is also significant that Trotsky, recalling the Trinity and the Christian God, said not a word about the disagreements between the God of the Quran, whose providence was personified for him by J.V. Stalin, with the Jewish God of Leon Trotsky, L.D. Bronstein. After that, Those who are dissatisfied with the repressions against the traditionally Muslim peoples of the USSR during the war years should address the Sharia. What should a true imam do if he leads a jihad, and the allegedly Muslim clergy behaves ambiguously or directly aids the enemy, and the crowd who consider themselves Muslim obey the clergy, despite the fact that the Quranic teaching demands that a Muslim should obey God according to Sovest, and not any earthly masters? I don't know how Putin convinced the head of Chechnya, but I don't exclude that Putin explained something to him from Sharia, and why Stalin evicted the Chechens and Ingush after the war. Stalin had a right to do so. In order to understand this, one must get into the society that existed before the baptism of Rus. I can only answer approximately. Were there princes? Yes, there were. Was there a crowd? Yes, there was. Were there Jretzes and others? Yes, there were. We cannot know the distribution of statistics. There were also people with an animal type of psyche structure. There were zombies, there were demons. There were people who were on the way to the human type of psyche structure. What am I proceeding from? We came to the conclusion that Jesus was in Russia. Because there is a dark gap in history concerning what he did until the age of 33. There is data that says he was in India, Japan, in Tibet, but this does not correspond to reality. Having received a revelation from above about how society should be arranged, a natural question arose. Is it possible to see if there is something similar on Earth? And he received the answer, go to the north, and there you will meet these people. He met these people, since Jesus, in our understanding, was God's successor on earth. A successor is a person who understands his part in providence, which he must fulfill, and who is in constant contact with God through the language of life circumstances. It was when he returned from Russia that he began to preach intensively. He hadn't preached like that before. Having seen that there was something similar on earth, he began to preach intensively. I think that there are the Gospels of Jesus on 800 shelves in the Vatican. But the fate of the hymn to Aton befell the Gospel of Jesus too. Otherwise it is not clear why Andrew the Apostle, who came to Russia, was accepted in the Caucasus, but the Russians did not accept him. Because in fact, Andrew the Apostle came to Russia with an ultimatum not in the literal sense. He came to the Jretzes, who were responsible for the function of predicting in Russia. He said, either submit to the new conception, because this is already a global level of responsibility, or present yours. The Jretzes believed that the world in which they lived, and the predictions that they were engaged in, and that they performed the function of prediction for local princes, this was entirely enough from their point of view. 2,000 years have passed since then, and the function that they did not fulfill, in fact we had to fulfill. But we would not have been able to do anything if new youth had not appeared in our environment who are not loaded with stereotypes of the past. There has never been, in the history of Russia, this freedom of information that we have today. An ordinary person has never had access to mass media. As soon as the internet appeared, we said that this is our weapon. We could not even imagine how to spread books or hundreds of analytical notes. We have filled this weapon with meaningful information. There is nothing meaningful on the internet except our information. Going back to Stalin, I'd like to say that Bolshevism in 1917, as well as Stalin, who actually became the main Bolshevik, declared for the first time to the whole world that there would be no exploitation of man by man. And we state that all problems end as soon as the exploitation of man by man ends. Those who lived in Stalin's times, after the war, know that there was no ethnic strife. Those who were breaking up the USSR knew what they were doing. They knew that any elite would grab their piece of wealth, pull down the others, build palaces for themselves, buy private planes, have personal security, and everyone else would have to survive as they could. Stalin expanded the social base, the core of governance, to the borders of the whole society, so that there would be no elite. Many ordinary people, ordinary workers, having received a very good education, became good governors. I also lived in those times when there existed good education in our country. The education which exists now is far from what was in my time. You know, I have traveled around the world, and I can 100% assure you all that the education that was given in the schools and colleges in the West does not even come close to the education in the Suvorov schools. We were given very high-quality education, despite the fact that the standards of education were biblical. In our opinion, the carriers of the biblical conception understood that everything was moving towards a dead end. Therefore, they moved on to the project of convergence, to take all the best from capitalism and all the best from socialism. But again, the question arises, what is the conception of convergence? The global predictor is both people and ideas live longer than people. Bersted described 22 hierophants in the history of ancient Egypt. The most complex question is what happened during the time of Akhenaten in the 13th century BC. Was it a loss by the global predictor, those hierophants, or a deliberate provocation? We considered both variants. They understood before, and they understand now, that God exists. The question arises, how to present this God? 600-year cycles were revealed. Akhenaten II to 628, then Buddha, then Jesus, then Muhammad in 628 AD. It is important that there are approximately 2,000 years between the hymns of Aten and the Quran. Not only the content of the texts are similar to each other, but also the rhythm. After all, both were written in blank verse. We have received translations. When I start telling the Islamic elites about it, they are shocked. They don't know this. They don't even know the Quran. When I tell them, they say, "Come to us, we will make you a mullah." If I were Putin, I would do the same. The common algorithmics is as follows. To identify the clans, he is the one between all the clans, so as not to bring the struggle between the clans to a bloody showdown, and then wait for the clans to put each other down. This will happen for sure. Liberals will never return to power legally. Imagine if back then they hadn't been allowed to come to power. We would now have underground liberals, not 100 or 200 people, but maybe hundreds of thousands. The Chinese suppressed their liberals. They have everything ahead in the future in this regard. And at a meeting with them I told them about this. They have great difficulties. They made a breakthrough, but we are still moving ahead of them. We also gave them the conception of social safety back in 1993. We work with other countries. By the way, in the East, the conception of social safety is perceived more calmly and easily than in the West. This is natural. There are no such rigid canons in the East. Buddhism, Hinduism, Confucianism are a part of their cultures. We are always told that we are the West, but we are not the West or the East. Russia, of course, has its own mission. East is East and West is West, and never the twain shall meet. Russia has a civilizing mission. Sooner or later, there will be one common, pan-earthly civilization, in which there will be many national cultures, languages, but not only one English language which now prevails. Moreover, I personally do not want to speak English in the West or in any other countries. If you want, listen to Russian. If you don't want... Last time I spoke a lot about English. After that, a huge amount of materials on this subject arrived. You know, when I come to India, there they have some strange English. I come to the UAE, they speak English but another English. I arrive in Malaysia, English is of a different type. In Vietnam, English is also different. In Germany, another English as well. English is different everywhere. Once an acquaintance of mine who lived in England for a long time told me that when he came to Birmingham and arrived in a street, at the one end of the street they spoke one kind of English, and at the other end they spoke another kind of English. And in Russian we speak the same Russian everywhere, let it be in Kamchatka or Kaliningrad. Sooner or later, everyone in the world will speak Russian. I would like it to be faster, but the most important thing is for this process to be irreversible forever. There is no need to be afraid for the Russian language. It has absorbed and worked out so many French and German words. It grinds English words too.